The untouchable True School Sports Empire proudly presents something the boxing game's been missing. Hey, what's going on? It's your boy BT, and I came here to talk some boxing with the thousands of True School Sports subscribers. Now, this is going to be a long-winded video, so please get your popcorn ready. Make sure you don't make too many plans, and if you do make plans and you can't watch this whole video in one sitting, just watch it in parts. It'll probably be good for you to watch it in parts so you could digest it. This video will be like a 5-course meal. You can't just get the whole appreciation for it in one sitting. You gotta eat it slowly, digest it, and that's where you'll get maximum enjoyment and understanding from what I'm talking about in this video. But in this particular video, this is gonna be my unbiased, and I gotta highlight that word unbiased because when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, it's very hard to not be biased. I don't like the guy. But for this video, I'm going to put my personal feelings aside and give it to you guys raw. What I think about the fight, what I think about both fighters, how they match up, styles, all that stuff, the psychology of both fighters, all that stuff. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty in this video because believe it or not, I am excited for this fight because from my perspective, and it's only my perspective, this is the first credible fight Canelo Alvarez has truly had since 2019 when he fought Daniel Jacobs, because Kovalev didn't come to win. And Kovalev was already weight drained. They had a tough out Anthony Yarde, so you can't really give that fight its just due. Callum Smith, I never thought he was that good to begin with. I even made the video saying that it was a mismatch before it even happened. I got crucified for it, but wound up being proven ultimately right, and nobody came back and apologized to me for the rude comments. And Avni Yildirim, which was pretty much a mismatch. So here you got a guy in Billy Joe Saunders who, in his career, he does not know how to lose. He's not, he doesn't know how to lose. He's got a good blend of boxing skills and grit. A lot of people are predicting that Billy Joe Saunders is going to get knocked out in this fight, which is possible. But, he's never really been hurt. Since he's been at the World Championship level, nobody's really hurt Billy Joe Saunders like that. So with that being said, it's not just going to be this easy task that everybody thinks, for Canelo to just go in there and just hurt Billy Joe Saunders. And on the other side, you have Canelo Alvarez, the guy that right now he has this aura of invincibility. That right now it looks like Canelo Alvarez, his mental abilities and his physical abilities are meeting up at its highest peak. And when that happens in boxing for any fighter, that's called a fighter's prime. That's a fighter's best version of himself. So it looks like Canelo Alvarez could be in his prime years, But it's an interesting fight because Billy Joe Saunders, we've seen before, when the fights are, when the stakes are the highest, that's when he fights at his best. We saw it with David Lemieux. We've seen it with Andy Lee. But this is going to be an occasion and a stage unlike anything Billy Joe Saunders has ever experienced to this point in his career. So that makes it interesting as well, Billy Joe Saunders. Let's start with the styles of both fighters because I think that's a good foundation to start with. So you got Canelo Alvarez, right? And, he the best way I could describe Canelo Alvarez's style is that Canelo Alvarez is a flat-footed counterpuncher. He's a flat-footed counterpuncher. And I mean that in the most respectful way in this video. He's a very intelligent fighter. He knows how to close the gap. Early in his career, he had a tendency to fight in spurts. Now he's channeled that ability of fighting in spurts to now being able to sustain that activity round after round at a consistent rate. So you always see Canelo Alvarez pressing the action, going forward at a consistent rate. On top of that, he's one of the best counterpunchers this sport has to offer. And if need be, we've seen it in the past before with guys like Billy Joe Saunders. When he fought Austin Trout, we saw Canelo Alvarez in the earlier stage of his career using his jab to close the gap. So I expect Canelo Alvarez in this fight to be using that jab to close the distance on Billy Joe Saunders and to land those shots to the liver, or as we call here on True School Sports, those rib dinners, and to slow down Billy Joe Saunders because in order for Canelo Alvarez to win and look good doing it, he's going to have to slow down the legs and the movement of Billy Joe Saunders, which brings me to Billy Joe Saunders, who, let's be real and let's have it right, Billy Joe Saunders is a guy in his career that's fought up and down to the level of competition. But when this guy is right, and switched on, Billy Joe Saunders is one of the best technical fighters this sport of boxing has to offer. We're talking about a guy that's southpaw, speedy, range, got great timing, has a lot of confidence in himself, gypsy, so he's tough. And this is the kind of fight for Canelo, I'll be honest. Canelo Alvarez, his last couple of fights, this hasn't been the case. but we've seen it in other stages, in earlier stages of his career. Canelo Alvarez isn't the fastest starter. We even saw it in the Kovalev fight. And if that's the case in this fight, I wouldn't be surprised if Billy Joe Saunders gets off to a flying start. I'm talking like after the first 6 rounds, he's put 4 rounds in the bank, 4-2, something like that. Because I think this is going to be a fight where Canelo Alvarez is going to have to get Billy Joe Saunders' timing down, land those body shots, slow him down, cut that ring off. And when he does that, that's when the fight really begins for him. So if Canelo Alvarez is going to win this fight, I see it being a kind of performance where he's going to begin to figure him out in the middle rounds and break him down late. And whether he stops him later on, that remains to be seen. I personally don't think he will. Just due to the simple fact that, Canelo Alvarez had a guy in Callum Smith who stood right in front of him and came to Survivor 12 rounds, and he didn't stop him. So it leads me to believe that Canelo Alvarez's power, while it's good and while it's respectable, and you have to definitely respect his power, I don't think it's the kind of power that's truly like creme de la creme that's going to put guys like Billy Joe Saunders away. But I could be wrong. We've seen him beat up Avni Yildirim, but that's Avni Yildirim. This is a whole different level of fighter. So how does Billy Joe Saunders win this fight? Because let's be real, let's have it right. Billy Joe Saunders is going to go up into this fight with the odds stacked against him. Canelo Alvarez is the A-side fighter. He's the face of boxing. He's the guy that, has all the money behind him. And you got to understand something about boxing. Now, I really want to drive this point home. This fight, and I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be there in Texas at the fights. It's gonna be a momentous occasion. I'll be there, so let me know if you're gonna be there in the comments. But this fight is gonna hold the largest crowd boxing has seen since the pandemic. We're talking about 70,000 people at Cowboy Stadium in Arlington, Texas. And that's a big deal. And that's important because the reality is this: Canelo Alvarez is a money-making machine. And when you are a money-making machine like Canelo Alvarez, there's not too many fighters like him in boxing. And to beat a guy like that, you got to really beat a guy like that. You can't just kind of win. You can't just have a disputed decision. You have to go in there and beat him in the most convincing way possible, because the powers that be are going to want to keep the gravy train rolling and keep that money coming in. And you can't really blame them, because boxing is a business masqueraded as a sport at the end of the day. So Billy Joe Saunders is going to have the very hard task of being a fantastic fighter in Canelo Alvarez. He's going to have the very corrupt Texas judges against him. He's got his promoter that seems to be more on the Canelo Alvarez side of things these days. And he's going to be fighting in hostile territory where I would say 95% or 97% of that stadium is going to be rooting for Canelo Alvarez. So it's a lot to overcome for Billy Joe Saunders. A lot to overcome. And I'll say this: if Billy Joe Saunders is able to win this fight, then put him in the Hall of Fame, because no fighter, in my estimation, no fighter will fight with more odds stacked against them than Billy Joe Saunders. But he can do it. If there was a guy that could outbox Canelo in this weight class right now, it's Billy Joe Saunders. Because we've seen in the past, going back to those Trout fight, going back to the Lara fight, and if you want to take it back even further to 10 years ago when he made his American debut and he fought Larry Mosley, a long, rangy, slick boxer, but he was an orthodox fighter. But same attributes, long, rangy, slick boxer. He had amazing success with Canelo Alvarez, and he didn't get the decision either. So Billy Joe Saunders has a chance. He's a live dog. He's no bum. He's no slouch, and I fully believe he's going to come to win. How does Billy Joe Saunders keep Canelo Alvarez off of him for 12 rounds? And that's a great question. Now, it's very easy to dismiss Billy Joe Saunders and say, well, he's got no power. He's not a big puncher. So that means Canelo Alvarez is just going to walk him down. And, that's a very straightforward statement. That's a very that's a very popular statement that a lot of boxing fans are going to make. But I'll be honest with you, I don't see it that way. I think Billy Joe Saunders has respectable power. He in many ways, the way I see it, he's much like Canelo in the sense that neither one of these guys at 168 is a big puncher like a Benavidez, like a Dave Benavidez or an Edgar Berlanga, to where they're going to get you out of there with just one shot. These guys got to put them together and break you down to get you out of there. But that's not always a bad thing. I think a lot of times in boxing, as fans, we overrate power. We put too much of a premium on power. Now, power is great. It's a great get out of jail free card. If you're losing by a lot of rounds, it can really bail you out later on in fights. But sometimes not having the most power is a great thing, because you allow yourself to fight with a bigger imagination, and you explore other ways to win rounds. And I think we could apply that statement to both fighters in this fight, but I'm using it more so for Billy Joe in this case because he's the guy that's looked at to be the lighter puncher of the two. And with that being said, there's a lot of ways he can win rounds this fight. He can win rounds, I believe, off the back foot, fighting in a similar manner to when he fought Lemieux. I believe Lemieux could win a fight slugging it out in spots. You can't slug it out with Canelo for a prolonged period of time because I believe that will play more to his advantage. And who knows, man? Like, look, Canelo Alvarez, I don't think he's really been touched with anything significant since the Jacobs fight. So who knows? Maybe Canelo Alvarez forgot what it's like to get hit under the lights. We'll see, man. But I think Billy Joe Saunders. I think two things people are overlooking when it comes to Billy Joe is, number one, he's never been stopped ever in his career. So people are making him sound like he's just gonna be this guy that goes there and lays down for Canelo Alvarez, and that's not the case. This guy is tough. He's gritty. We've seen Billy Joe Saunders in there with big punchers like Andy Lee and David Lemieux, and those guys had a hard time laying a glove on him. And Canelo Alvarez is obviously better than those guys, but still, he's diffused bombs in terms of one-punch knockout power that are much more dangerous to Canelo Alvarez. So he can do the same thing with Canelo Alvarez. So yeah, I think people need to understand. One thing people need to understand about boxing is power is great, and there's many instances where not having power against certain fighters will be to your disadvantage. But not in this case, because Canelo Alvarez, from what we've seen so far at 168, he has not proven himself to be a massive puncher. He's a respectable puncher. He's a solid puncher, but he's not like a massive puncher at 168. He's surely not the puncher at 168 that he was at 154 or even 160, because even at 160, Canelo Alvarez really wasn't knocking out no elite middleweights, because he didn't knock out Jacobs. He didn't knock out Golovkin. He didn't knock on all those guys. The guys that he had his best knockouts against at that weight or in the weights below were guys like James Kirkland and Amir Khan, smaller guys or guys that had leaky defense. So this is not that guy. Billy Joe Saunders does not fit that description. And Canelo Alvarez is going to have to really show the extra bit of quality in this fight if he wants to stop a guy like Billy Joe. So Billy Joe has a lot of things working for him. Canelo Alvarez is not a big puncher on 168. Billy Joe, I would say, has the advantage in the foot speed department, the footwork department, and I think he's got a better jab than Canelo. Now, I could be wrong, but that's what I believe. Canelo Alvarez is going to have his patience tested in this fight. Now, I'm going to make an unpopular statement here, and this is only my opinion, but a lot of people say that Canelo Alvarez has became this new fighter since he lost to Floyd Mayweather, which I don't see why. I don't see how, if you objectively watch his fights, you can say that, because to me, he's the same fighter he was against Floyd he is now. The only glaring difference between the Canelo that fought Floyd and the Canelo that's fighting right now in the present is that he's just gained more experience and more rounds, and he's more composed with his upper body. So he's a lot more comfortable in the pocket, and defensively he's improved a lot as a fighter. But other than that, the tendencies are still the same. He's flat-footed. He likes to press forward. And he's always looking for big counter shots. His stamina, for whatever reason, you could say it's experience, you could say it's performance-enhancing drugs, but his stamina has improved, and he's been able to sustain his stamina and not fight in as many spurts. But he still fights in spurts here and there. So I see Canelo as pretty much the same fighter he was when he fought Floyd. Just there's not much difference in it. That's just my opinion. But his patience will be tested in this fight. And I remember when he fought Floyd, obviously he's Floyd Mayweather. He's one of the best boxers of all time. But like when he fought Floyd was, what made Floyd so good in that fight was he wasn't a big puncher either. Floyd was never known as a big puncher, but he was able to get Canelo respect because he was a sharp puncher. And I think Billy Joe Saunders has that same quality on a lesser scale that Floyd did. He's not a big puncher. He's not going to get you out of there with one shot. But Billy Joe is he's quick-footed, he's fleet of foot, and he's a sharp puncher. And sometimes in boxing, it's not about how hard you punch, but how sharp you punch, because those sharp punches, and I can speak on this just from sparring, sometimes it's better to have the punches where your opponent is loading up and throwing hard, because you can see those punches coming from a mile away. You can brace yourself, you can slip, block, roll. you have a lot of options as to what you could do if you see the punch coming. But when you're in there with a fighter who knows what he's doing, who's got good command of range and distance, and he's a sharp puncher, these punches get from point A to point B quick, and your opponent's making decisions real quickly, that's a lot more difficult, and that can be a lot more frustrating. So if Canelo Alvarez is getting tagged with sharp jabs or counters, he's going to have his patience tested, and he's going to have to remain poised and stick with his game plan, and that's where the experience should come into play, So that's what makes this fight interesting is the cat and mouse game, the chess match, and, to me, I don't really think either one of these guys is a big puncher at 168. So, who has the better chance of breaking the other guy down? Conventional wisdom says it's probably Canelo because Canelo is the better body puncher of the two. But I wouldn't be surprised if Billy Joe Saunders surprises people with the power that he does have because he's a sharp puncher, much like Canelo. Canelo's not a big puncher, but he's a sharp puncher as well. The same thing with Canelo. So what's the mentality? Like, you got to ask yourself the question, like, what's the mentality of these guys going into the fight? You have Canelo Alvarez, who's come out on many occasions and said he's unbeatable. He believes at this point he's unbeatable, that he's matured, and that he's graduated to that next stage in his career. And you know what? He's got every right to feel that way because of the guys, of some of the fighters he's been in there with. I would venture to say, though, that I think he's living in a bit of a fantasy world because he hasn't fought a style like this since he fought Lara and Trout and them guys. So, he might have himself questioning himself if Billy Joe Saunders strings a couple rounds together. But I digress. He really believes in himself. He's at a stage of his career where he feels he can't be beat, and that's a dangerous fighter nonetheless. Billy Joe Saunders is a guy that's been doing a lot of trolling. He's been doing a lot. He's been dishing out a lot of that British banter that sometimes goes over the head of many Americans because they don't understand the British culture and the British banter, and where when they joke around, it's just chock full of sarcasm. So if you take things too serious and you're not on the alert for sarcasm, a lot of the British humor will go over your head. But I know Billy Joe Saunders believes in himself, and I know Billy Joe Saunders wouldn't have taken this fight if he didn't think he could win the fight. So with that being said, I think both fighters. This isn't like a Canelo versus Callum Smith, where Callum Smith, no disrespect to him because I've disrespected Callum Smith enough on this channel. Callum Smith was a guy that in my estimation, even though he had a lot of belts, Callum Smith was a guy that was just happy to be there. He was happy to be at the big dance, but he had no intention or didn't have that self-belief in the deepest, darkest parts of his soul to go out there and win the big dance. You know what I'm saying? So I like the mentality of Billy Joe because much like Tyson Fury, who's going to be at the fight, who's already on record saying that Billy Joe will already win the fight, he's got that gypsy mentality where it's that us versus the world mentality. And people can say what they want about Billy Joe, they can underestimate him, but if he switched on, this could be the most dangerous fight Canelo Alvarez has had since Floyd Mayweather. And you know what? I might regret this later on. God forbid, Billy Joe don't go in there and get knocked out in like 4 rounds. But I truly believe from a stylistic point of view, since the Mayweather fight, this is the most dangerous fight for Canelo. It wasn't Callum Smith, it wasn't Jacobs or Kovalev or Triple G, but it's this fight because Canelo Alvarez's weakness in his career. Go look at the history. You can go all the way back to his American debut with Larry Mosley. If you haven't seen that fight, I would go advise anybody to go watch the Larry Mosley fight. If you look at the pattern of what's giving Canelo the most problems, it's not guys who punch hard and it's not guys who are aggressive. It's fighters that are slick, fleet of foot, got long, rangy jabs, can slip, block, counter, things like that. Just crafty, slick fighters with good boxing IQ. And guys like Larry Mosley, Floyd, Trout, Lara, these guys fit that description. And Billy Joe, I would say, fits that description. And he's the first guy that's fit that description since he fought Floyd. So that makes this fight intriguing. So you have that. As far as my prediction, because I don't want to make this too long-winded, I think Billy Joe Saunders has a great chance of making this a very, very competitive fight. And I think he will make it a competitive fight. But where I think Billy Joe Saunders will ultimately come unstuck in this fight is it has nothing to do with Canelo being better than him, or being that much better than him or anything like that. I just think Billy Joe Saunders' best weight is not 168. I think his best weight is 160. And what makes Billy Joe Saunders such a stylistic problem for Canelo is his speed and his movement. And I've watched him at 168. He had that one fight against the when he won the Bacon title. But ultimately, in watching Billy Joe at 168, it looks like he's lost that little bit of speed, that little bit of elusiveness, that little bit of agility that he had at 160 in the Lemieux fight. And you know, I firmly believe he's gonna have some success in this fight, but him not having that extra bit of speed and agility, it will come back to haunt him in this fight. It will come to bite him in his ass. And I believe because of that, it will allow Canelo to close the gap a little bit quicker in the fight. You'll see Canelo Alvarez using a very educated jab, moving his head off the line, looking for hard, aggressive counter-punching opportunities. And if Billy Joe gets lazy and throws anything ridiculous, I believe Canelo will counter him and begin to break him down. So my prediction for the fight is I don't think Canelo Alvarez will stop Billy Joe Saunders. I don't think he has that kind of power. I don't think he has the kind of quality with his power punching to break down a guy like Billy Joe Saunders at 168 and knock him out. But what I do believe is he can break him down to the point where he outworks him to like a 115, 113 type of decision. I see the fight playing out where Billy Joe Saunders has success early, particularly within the first 4 to 5 rounds. I will not be the least bit surprised if Billy Joe Saunders wins 4 of the first 6 rounds or something like that. But as Canelo gets more comfortable, as Canelo settles into the fight, I believe as he's getting comfortable and figuring out the rhythm of Billy Joe Saunders, his lack of that extra bit of speed and agility comes back to bite him in his behind in those middle rounds or later rounds. So as he's coming down, Canelo's going up. Canelo's feinting him, giving him really good educated feints, creating openings, using the jab a little bit more than we're accustomed to seeing. If you want to know how I think Canelo's going to fight in this particular fight, go back and watch how he fought the Austin Trout fight, how much he used the jab in that fight in comparison to his other fights. That's how I think Canelo's going to fight. And I see Canelo Alvarez winning a 115, 130 type of decision. Billy Joe Saunders will be really good in the fight early on. He's going to surprise a lot of people, not me, but he will surprise a lot of people, and his stock will go up. But I see Canelo Alvarez right now just being a little bit too good for him at 168. Now, if this fight were 160, to me this would be a pick'em fight. But because it's not at 160, I got Canelo Alvarez as like a 60-40 favorite in my opinion. Now, I'm gonna use this to pivot into a guy that I have a high opinion of, which is Demetrius Andrade, who, as many of you guys know, I've wanted to see Canelo fight for a long time. Now, you could say that if he fought Canelo, that the same things I'm saying about Billy Joe would apply to Demetrius Andrade, that 168 isn't his best weight, and that's why he loses to Canelo. And you'd be right in what you're saying, but where I think him versus Canelo 168 is different to Saunders at 168 is that Boo Boo is a bit more longer and rangier, and his body and his frame could afford to carry some extra weight. So I don't think he'll be as effective as a guy like Billy Joe is, who's not as long, rangy, and his frame isn't as wide as a Demetrius Andrade. Factor in that Demetrius Andrade has respectable punching power on both hands. He's more awkward. He's more athletic. He's got more tools in his toolbox than Billy Joe. Billy Joe is skillful. Don't get me wrong. Billy Joe is as skillful as they come in the super middleweight division. But Demetrius Andrade has more tools in his toolbox that he can go to in a fight against Canelo Alvarez. There's more looks. There's more things he can show Canelo Alvarez in the fight. There's more things for Canelo Alvarez to solve when it comes to Demetrius Andrade, and that's what makes him a tougher opponent for Canelo than a guy like Billy Joe Saunders. But this fight is interesting because this fight is for the WBO title at super middleweight. Demetrius Andrade is a WBO middleweight champion. So theoretically, if Canelo Alvarez wins this fight at 168 and becomes WBO middleweight champion, and Demetrius Andrade follows through on what he said he'll do and goes up to 168 to fight Canelo Alvarez, or to try to fight Canelo Alvarez, the WBO rules state that if you're a fighter who holds a title in another weight class and you decide to move up, you can actually go to the WBO and you can request to become mandatory challenger if your boxing record and accomplishments warrant that, and that's at the WBO's discretion. That's literally in the WBO rulebook. And Demetrius Andrade is WBO champion at middleweight, so you'd have to think that would hold some sort of cachet with the sanctioning body. And we've seen this in the past with Terrence Crawford. You know, Terrence Crawford was very eager to get the big fights at welterweight. So when he moved up from 140 to 147, he didn't waste no time. He used his status as WBO junior welterweight champion and got a shot at welterweight immediately. His first fight at welterweight against Jeff Horn. So we could see that same scenario play itself out if Demetrius Andrade moves up, and that's the storyline of this fight that nobody's talking about, that the media hasn't talking about, that nobody's talking about. But it is a storyline. It is something that could happen. So that's the intrigue of the fight to me, because Canelo Alvarez, for whatever reason, and I have my theories as to why. I won't get into it because it'll cause me to make a bunch of negative statements about Canelo Alvarez. And this is an unbiased video, but for whatever reason, Canelo Alvarez didn't fight at 154 when he had a chance to. You know, he could have fought him at 160 for undisputed, and he didn't do it then. So make of that what you will. But if somehow the stars align, Canelo beats Billy Joe Saunders, Boo Boo moves up, requests mandatory status from the WBO, they grant it to him. Will Canelo Alvarez avoid a Demetrius Andrade fight for a third time in a third weight class? I mean, that would be quite the story. But I digress. It'll be a good fight. I think it's good for boxing that we're gonna have a bigger crowd. You know, because I miss these big fights. 70,000 people is a lot. You know, I've never been to a boxing match with 70,000 people, so it's gonna be a momentous occasion in Texas, and I'm very excited to go. You know, very excited to go to the fight. And yeah, man. So that's my little synopsis on the fight. You know, Billy Joe Saunders, Canelo Alvarez, hell of a fight. I got Canelo Alvarez winning the fight via close, unanimous decision. I'm talking like a 115, 113 type of scorecard. Billy Joe Saunders looks good in the first 4 to 5 rounds. Canelo Alvarez figures him out in the middle rounds. And then ultimately he outworks him to a decision and does enough to win in a convincing fashion. 115, 113, but a clear 115, 113. And then we're looking at Canelo Alvarez more than likely next fighting Caleb Plant, which I'm not really excited about because I don't. It's a good fight, but the fight I really want to see is him and Demetrius Andrade, because I just think stylistically those styles are going to clash. There's a lot of challenges in that fight for Canelo Alvarez. There's challenges in that fight for Demetrius Andrade. We've never seen Demetrius Andrade in a big fight like that, so that would be a great for him to see how he thrives under that type of pressure, under that type of microscope, because he's never been at that level. But I digress. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. That's my little review of Canelo Alvarez versus Saunders. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you agree with, disagree with? What's your prediction? All that good stuff. Leave it in the comments down below. Take the time to subscribe. Like I say in every single one of these videos, you can love me or you can hate me, but I'm just giving Daniel. Until next time, take care, guys.